Picture this. You're a young woman in a room full of seasoned military officers, each one convinced that flying the most dangerous aircraft in the sky is no job for someone like you. The laughter echoes off the walls as a decorated general makes what he thinks is a harmless joke. But sometimes, the universe has a funny way of turning jokes into destiny. What happened next didn't just silence that room. It rewrote the rulebook on what courage really looks like. This isn't just another story about breaking barriers. This is about the moment when one person's determination turned a casual dismissal into aviation legend, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to doubt isn't words. It's action that leaves everyone speechless. Get ready for a true story that will make you believe that the impossible is just another word for challenge accepted. The morning sun cast long shadows across Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona as Captain Sarah Mitchell walked through the corridors of the operations building. At 28, she had already earned her place among the elite fighter pilots. But the respect she commanded in the cockpit didn't always translate to the briefing rooms where old-school attitudes still lingered like morning fog. Sarah had been flying F-16 Fighting Falcons for 3 years, accumulating over 800 flight hours, and earning decorations that would make any pilot proud. Her precision in air-to-air combat training was legendary among her peers, and her ability to handle high-stress situations had saved more than one training mission from disaster. Yet despite her proven track record, she still found herself having to prove her worth again and again. The day that would change everything started like any other. The monthly pilot briefing was scheduled for 0900 hours, and Sarah arrived early, as was her habit. She preferred to review the agenda and mentally prepare for whatever challenges lay ahead. The briefing room gradually filled with pilots from various squadrons, their conversations creating a familiar buzz of technical jargon and good-natured ribbing. General Robert Bull Harrison entered the room with his characteristic commanding presence. At 55, he was a veteran of multiple conflicts and had flown everything from F-4 Phantoms in his early career to the latest generation fighters. His nickname Bull wasn't just about his stubborn determination. It also reflected his sometimes blunt approach to communication and his old-fashioned views on certain aspects of military life. The briefing covered routine matters, upcoming training exercises, new safety protocols, and budget considerations for the next fiscal year. Sarah listened intently, taking notes on points that would affect her squadron's operations. She had learned early in her career that attention to detail during these sessions often paid dividends later when she was in the air. As the formal briefing concluded, the atmosphere in the room relaxed. Pilots began chatting in small groups, discussing everything from technical modifications to weekend plans. Sarah was reviewing her notes when she overheard a conversation between General Harrison and several senior pilots near the front of the room. The A-10 program is facing budget cuts again, one pilot was saying. They're questioning whether we need specialized close air support aircraft in the modern battlefield. General Harrison shook his head firmly. The Warthog isn't going anywhere. That aircraft has saved more ground troops than any other plane in our arsenal. The problem isn't the aircraft. It's finding pilots tough enough to fly it properly. Captain James Rodriguez, a veteran F-15 pilot, chuckled. Come on, General. The A-10 isn't exactly rocket science. Point it at the target and pull the trigger. Easy to say when you're flying air-to-air missions at 30,000 feet, General Harrison replied. Try taking an A-10 into a hot landing zone where you're dodging surface-to-air missiles while trying to provide precise fire support to troops who are counting on you to save their lives. It's a completely different kind of flying. The conversation continued, with various pilots sharing their perspectives on the unique challenges of close air support missions. Sarah found herself drawn into the discussion, despite not being directly involved in the conversation. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately known as the Warthog, was a legendary aircraft designed specifically for close air support and ground attack missions. Its distinctive design, with engines mounted high on the fuselage and a massive Gu-8 Avenger cannon as its primary weapon, made it instantly recognizable and highly effective in its specialized role. The real challenge isn't the aircraft systems, another pilot added. It's the mental toughness required to fly low and slow in hostile territory. Most pilots today are used to engaging targets from beyond visual range. The A-10 requires you to get close enough to see the whites of their eyes. Sarah had always been fascinated by the A-10's reputation and capabilities. Unlike the sleek, high-speed fighters she was accustomed to flying, the Warthog was built like a flying tank, designed to absorb punishment and keep flying. Its pilots were known for their exceptional skills in close air support, often operating in conditions that would challenge even the most experienced aviators. As the group discussion continued, Sarah noticed that the conversation had shifted to more general topics about pilot capabilities and the changing nature of air combat. The tone remained professional, but there was an underlying current of traditional thinking that she had encountered throughout her career. Modern warfare requires adaptability, General Harrison was saying. A good pilot should be able to transition between different aircraft and mission types. But some missions require specific temperaments and skill sets. Speaking of adaptability, Captain Rodriguez said with a grin, "I'd love to see some of our hotshot fighter jocks try their hand at flying the Warthog. It would be a humbling experience." General Harrison smiled at the comment. It certainly would be. The A-10 separates the real pilots from the ones who just know how to follow computer prompts. He glanced around the room, his eyes taking in the various pilots still present. "Take someone like Captain Mitchell here," he said, nodding in Sarah's direction. "Excellent F-16 pilot, outstanding record. But could she handle the unique challenges of flying an A-10 in combat conditions?" The room fell slightly quieter as attention focused on Sarah. She felt the familiar sensation of being put under a microscope, something she had experienced countless times throughout her career. The general's tone wasn't hostile, but there was something in his delivery that suggested he wasn't entirely serious about the question. "The A-10 requires a different mindset," General Harrison continued, seemingly warming to his subject. "It's not about speed and maneuverability. It's about precision, patience, and the ability to operate effectively in high-threat environments while maintaining situational awareness of friendly forces on the ground." "That sounds like qualities any good pilot should possess," Sarah interjected respectfully, unable to remain silent any longer. General Harrison turned to face her fully, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "In principle, yes. But there's a difference between possessing qualities and applying them effectively in the unique environment of close air support missions." The other pilots in the group were watching the exchange with interest. Sarah sensed that this was becoming more than just a casual conversation. There was something in the general's manner that suggested he was building toward a point. "The A-10 community is pretty tight-knit," General Harrison continued. "They have their own culture, their own way of doing things. It's not just about flying skills, it's about fitting into that community and earning their respect." "Respect is earned through performance, regardless of the aircraft type," Sarah replied calmly. She had learned long ago not to let challenging conversations rattle her composure. "True enough," the general acknowledged. "But some aircraft are more forgiving of mistakes than others. The F-16 will get you out of trouble fast. The A-10," he paused for effect. "Well, let's just say that when things go wrong in a Warthog, you'd better know exactly what you're doing." The conversation had taken on an edge that Sarah recognized from previous encounters throughout her career. It wasn't overt hostility, but rather a subtle questioning of her capabilities based on assumptions about her background and experience. She had faced similar challenges when transitioning to fighter aircraft, and had learned that the best response was often to let her performance speak for itself. "Every aircraft has its challenges," Sarah said evenly. "I've always found that preparation, training, and respect for the machine tend to overcome most obstacles." General Harrison's smile broadened slightly. "Spoken like a true pilot. But you know what? Sometimes the best learning experiences come from stepping outside your comfort zone." He paused, glancing around at the other pilots who were listening intently. "Tell you what, Captain Mitchell, if you're really interested in understanding what A-10 pilots go through, maybe you should try flying one." The suggestion hung in the air for a moment. Sarah could feel the attention of everyone in the immediate area focused on her reaction. She sensed that this was one of those moments where her response would be remembered and discussed long after the briefing room had emptied. "Are you offering me the opportunity to do that, sir?" Sarah asked directly. General Harrison chuckled, and several of the other pilots smiled at what they clearly perceived as an amusing exchange. Well, Captain, it's not quite that simple. A-10 qualification requires extensive specialized training, and there would need to be compelling operational reasons for such a cross-training assignment. The laughter that followed was good-natured but pointed. Sarah realized that the general's suggestion had been more rhetorical than real, a way of making his point about the unique challenges of A-10 operations while acknowledging her interest in a way that didn't require any actual follow-through. However, General Harrison continued, his tone becoming more serious. If you're genuinely interested in learning more about A-10 operations, I could arrange for you to observe some training missions and speak with A-10 pilots about their experiences. It might give you a better appreciation for what they do. I would appreciate that opportunity very much, sir, Sarah replied sincerely. Understanding different mission types and aircraft capabilities can only make me a better pilot overall. The general nodded approvingly. That's the right attitude, Captain. I'll have someone from the A-10 training squadron contact you to set something up. As the conversation wound down and the various pilots began to disperse, Sarah remained in the briefing room for a few extra minutes, processing what had just occurred. The exchange with General Harrison had been cordial and professional, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there had been underlying assumptions about her capabilities that went beyond her actual qualifications and experience. Walking back to her squadron's operations area, Sarah reflected on the patterns she had observed throughout her career. Time and again, she had encountered situations where her abilities were questioned not because of her performance, but because of preconceived notions about who belonged in certain roles within the military aviation community. The suggestion about flying the A-10 had clearly been made in jest, but it had planted a seed in Sarah's mind. She had always prided herself on being willing to take on new challenges, and the idea of mastering a completely different type of aircraft and mission set was genuinely appealing. The A-10's reputation for toughness and the skill required to fly it effectively made it an intriguing professional challenge. That evening, Sarah found herself researching A-10 operations and capabilities with an intensity that surprised even her. The aircraft's history, its role in various conflicts, and the accounts of pilots who had flown it in combat painted a picture of an aircraft that demanded respect and skill in equal measure. The more she learned, the more interested she became in understanding what it would really take to master such a unique aircraft. She also began thinking strategically about the potential benefits of A-10 experience for her career. Cross-training in different aircraft types was often viewed favorably by promotion boards, and the experience could open doors to different types of assignments and responsibilities. More importantly, it would demonstrate her versatility and commitment to expanding her capabilities as an aviator. As she prepared for sleep that night, Sarah made a decision that would prove to be pivotal. Instead of letting General Harrison's comment fade into memory as casual conversation, she would pursue the opportunity to learn more about A-10 operations. If the chance ever arose to actually fly the aircraft, she would be prepared to seize it. The challenge had been issued, even if it had been delivered as a joke. Now it was up to her to determine how seriously she would take it, and what she was willing to do to prove that her capabilities extended far beyond the assumptions others might make about her. The seed had been planted, and Sarah Mitchell was not the type of person to let potential go unrealized. Little did anyone in that briefing room realize that this casual conversation would set in motion a series of events that would not only challenge every assumption about pilot capabilities, but would also demonstrate the power of determination when faced with skepticism. The stage had been set, and the real story was just beginning. True to his word, General Harrison arranged for Sarah to spend time with the 354th Fighter Squadron, one of the premier A-10 units stationed at Davis-Monthan. 3 days after their conversation, she received orders to report to Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos, the squadron commander, for an orientation on A-10 operations and capabilities. Lieutenant Colonel Santos was a legend in the A-10 community. With over 2,000 hours in the Warthog and multiple combat deployments, she had earned the respect of pilots across all aircraft types. Her reputation for tactical excellence and Leadership had made her one of the most sought-after mentors for pilots looking to understand close air support operations. When Sarah reported to the A-10 squadron headquarters, she was immediately struck by the different atmosphere compared to her F-16 unit. The walls were covered with photographs of A-10s in various combat situations, maps of deployment locations, and awards recognizing the squadron's contributions to ground support missions. There was a sense of pride and camaraderie that was palpable even to a visitor. Captain Mitchell, Lieutenant Colonel Santos greeted her with a firm handshake. General Harrison told me about your interest in learning more about what we do here. I have to say, it's refreshing to meet a fighter pilot who wants to understand ground attack operations. Thank you for taking the time to show me around, ma'am, Sarah replied. I've always been curious about close air support missions, and I understand the A-10 is the gold standard for that type of work. Santos smiled at the comment. The Warthog certainly has its reputation, but, like any aircraft, it's only as good as the pilot flying it. Come on, let me show you what makes this bird special. Their first stop was the aircraft themselves. Walking out to the flight line, Sarah got her first up-close look at the A-10 Thunderbolt II. The aircraft was immediately impressive in its stark functionality. Unlike the sleek lines of the F-16, the A-10 was built like a piece of industrial equipment designed for a specific job. Its twin engines were mounted high on the fuselage, away from debris that might be kicked up during low-altitude operations. The landing gear was designed to handle rough field conditions, and the entire aircraft had an armored bathtub surrounding the pilot to protect against ground fire. The GAU-8 Avenger is what most people notice first, Santos explained, pointing to the massive cannon that dominated the aircraft's nose. 7 barrels, fires 3,900 rounds per minute of 30mm ammunition. When this thing fires, it actually slows the aircraft down from the recoil. Sarah walked around the aircraft, taking in details that revealed the thoughtful engineering behind its design. The redundancy systems are impressive, she observed. Dual hydraulic systems, manual backup controls, engines separated to minimize single-point failures. Exactly right, Santos confirmed. This aircraft was designed by people who understood that close air support means operating in environments where you're going to take damage. The question isn't whether you'll get hit. It's whether you can complete the mission and get home after you've been hit. As they continued the aircraft tour, Santos explained the specific capabilities that made the A-10 unique. The aircraft could carry an enormous variety of ordnance, from precision-guided missiles to cluster bombs to marking rockets. Its sophisticated targeting systems allowed for precise engagement of ground targets while minimizing the risk to friendly forces. Most importantly, its ability to loiter over the battlefield for extended periods meant that ground troops could count on continuous support when they needed it most. Flying the A-10 isn't just about aircraft handling, Santos continued as they moved to the Squadron Operations Center. It's about understanding ground operations, communication protocols with forward air controllers, and making split-second decisions that can mean the difference between mission success and friendly fire incidents. The Operations Center was a hub of activity even during routine training periods. Large monitors displayed real-time information about training ranges, weather conditions, and aircraft status. Pilots were engaged in mission planning, using detailed maps and intelligence reports to prepare for upcoming sorties. Sarah was introduced to several A-10 pilots who took time to explain their mission planning process. Unlike air-to-air operations where the engagement parameters were relatively straightforward, close air support required detailed coordination with ground forces, careful consideration of civilian populations, and constant adaptation to changing tactical situations. The hardest part isn't flying the aircraft, explained Captain Tom Bradley, a pilot with 800 hours in the A-10. It's managing all the information streams while maintaining situational awareness and making decisions under pressure. You're monitoring radio communications from multiple ground units, coordinating with other aircraft, watching for threats, and trying to identify targets in complex environments where the difference between friend and foe might be 50 meters. Sarah spent the entire morning absorbing information about A-10 operations, from technical systems to tactical procedures. The complexity was impressive, but What struck her most was the dedication and professionalism of the pilots she met. They took their role as protectors of ground forces seriously, and their expertise in close air support operations was evident in every discussion. During lunch in the squadron dining facility, Lieutenant Colonel Santos asked Sarah about her background and career aspirations. General Harrison mentioned that you're one of the top F-16 pilots in your squadron. What's driving your interest in learning about A-10 operations? Sarah considered her response carefully. She didn't want to reveal the full context of her conversation with General Harrison, but she also wanted to be honest about her motivations. I've always believed that understanding different aspects of air power makes me a better pilot overall, she said. The A-10's mission set is so different from what I'm used to that I thought it would be valuable to understand how you approach problems that I've never had to face. That's a mature perspective, Santos replied. Too many pilots get focused on their specific aircraft and mission and never develop a broader understanding of how air power supports overall military objectives. After lunch, Santos arranged for Sarah to observe a training mission from the control tower. She watched as A-10s conducted simulated close air support exercises, working with ground controllers to engage targets while avoiding simulated friendly forces. The precision required was impressive, as pilots had to deliver ordnance accurately while operating at low altitudes and relatively slow speeds. See how Captain Rodriguez is setting up for his attack run, Santos pointed out as they watched from the tower. He's approaching from an angle that gives him the best visual on the target while keeping him clear of the simulated ground unit's position. It looks simple, but it requires constant calculation and adjustment based on winds, target movement, and threat assessment. Sarah watched intently as the aircraft maneuvered through the exercise. The A-10's flight characteristics were clearly very different from what she was used to. Where the F-16 was responsive and agile, the Warthog appeared more deliberate and stable. Its movements were purposeful rather than flashy, optimized for accuracy rather than spectacular maneuvering. Would you be interested in experiencing this from the cockpit? Santos asked unexpectedly. Sarah turned to look at her, surprised by the question. I'm not qualified for A-10 operations, ma'am. I'm not talking about flying solo, Santos clarified. We have a two-seat trainer version that we use for instruction. If you're really interested in understanding what we do, a familiarization flight would give you insights that you can't get from the ground. The offer was unexpected and exciting. Sarah had hoped to learn more about A-10 operations, but the possibility of actually experiencing the aircraft firsthand hadn't occurred to her. I would be very interested in that opportunity, if it's possible to arrange. Santos smiled. Let me make some calls. If your squadron commander approves, and we can get the paperwork sorted out, we could potentially arrange something for next week. The rest of the afternoon was spent in briefing rooms where Sarah learned about the specific procedures and protocols that governed A-10 operations. She studied communication formats, targeting procedures, and safety protocols that were unique to close air support missions. The amount of information was overwhelming, but she found herself genuinely fascinated by the complexity and precision required for effective ground attack operations. As the day concluded, Lieutenant Colonel Santos walked Sarah back to her vehicle. I have to say, Captain Mitchell, your questions and observations today have been impressive. You've grasped concepts that sometimes take new A-10 pilots weeks to understand. Thank you, ma'am. This has been an incredible learning experience. I'm going to be honest with you, Santos continued. When General Harrison asked me to show you around, I wasn't sure what to expect. Sometimes fighter pilots come here with preconceived notions about ground attack work. But you've approached this with genuine curiosity and respect for what we do. Sarah appreciated the feedback. I've learned more today than I expected, and it's given me a much greater appreciation for the complexity of close air support operations. Here's something to think about, Santos said as they reached Sarah's car. The A-10 community is always looking for exceptional pilots who can handle the unique challenges of our mission. If you ever decided you were seriously interested in transitioning to A-10s, there might be opportunities available. The suggestion caught Sarah off guard. I hadn't really thought about that possibility, ma'am. Just something to consider. Your background and the way you've approached today's orientation suggest you might have the right temperament for this kind of work. Santos paused. Let me work on setting up that familiarization flight. I think you'll find it enlightening. As Sarah drove back to her squadron, her mind was racing with everything she had learned. The A-10 community had impressed her with their professionalism, expertise, and dedication to their mission. The aircraft itself was a fascinating piece of engineering, designed for a specific role and optimized to excel in that environment. More importantly, the day had shown her that there might be more opportunities available than she had initially realized. Lieutenant Colonel Santos's suggestion about transition possibilities was unexpected, but it opened up new considerations about her career path and professional development. That evening, Sarah called her mentor, Colonel Patricia Wells, a senior pilot who had guided her through various career decisions over the years. Wells had been one of the early female fighter pilots and had navigated many of the same challenges that Sarah was facing in her own career. "Pat, I had an interesting day today," Sarah began, and proceeded to describe her experience with the A-10 squadron. "Sounds like you made a good impression," Wells observed after hearing the full account. "Maria Santos doesn't offer familiarization flights to just anyone, and she certainly wouldn't mention transition opportunities unless she was serious about it. The thing is, I hadn't really considered leaving the F-16 community," Sarah admitted. "I've worked hard to establish myself here, and there are still goals I want to accomplish." "That's understandable. But remember that career advancement often requires taking calculated risks and expanding your experience base," Wells replied. "Cross-training in A-10s could actually enhance your long-term prospects, especially if you're interested in command positions down the road." The conversation with her mentor helped Sarah organize her thoughts about the day's events and the possibilities that had emerged. She realized that what had started as a casual interest in learning about A-10 operations was evolving into something more significant. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself researching A-10 transition programs and career paths for pilots with close air support experience. She learned that A-10 pilots often moved into leadership positions across various aircraft types, and that the experience was highly valued for its emphasis on tactical decision-making and operational planning. When Lieutenant Colonel Santos called 3 days later to confirm that the familiarization flight had been approved, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The opportunity would give her direct experience with the aircraft and mission that had captured her imagination, but it would also represent a significant step toward a potential career change that she was still evaluating. "We've scheduled you for next Tuesday morning," Santos informed her. "You'll fly with Major Patricia Kim, one of our most experienced instructor pilots. The flight will include basic aircraft familiarization, some simple maneuvering, and a simulated close air support exercise if you're comfortable with that level of complexity." "I'll be ready, ma'am," Sarah replied, knowing that this flight would likely influence her thinking about future career decisions in ways she couldn't yet fully anticipate. The stage was set for Sarah to experience firsthand the aircraft and mission that had started as a casual conversation but was rapidly becoming something much more significant. The familiarization flight would either confirm that her interest in A-10 operations was justified, or it would help her realize that her future lay elsewhere. Either way, she would gain valuable experience and insights that would inform her decisions going forward. As she prepared for the upcoming flight, Sarah couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation. What had begun with General Harrison's casual suggestion about trying to fly the A-10 was now becoming a real possibility, driven by her own curiosity and the opportunities that had emerged from taking his comment seriously. Sometimes the most significant career developments came from the most unexpected conversations. Tuesday morning arrived with clear skies and perfect flying conditions. Sarah arrived at the A-10 Squadron Operations building an hour early, wanting to ensure she was properly prepared for her familiarization flight. She had spent the weekend studying A-10 flight manuals and procedures, determined to make the most of this unique opportunity. Major Patricia Kim was already in the briefing room when Sarah arrived, reviewing flight plans and weather information. At 34, Kim was one of the most respected instructor pilots in the A-10 community, with over 1,500 hours in the aircraft and multiple deployment experiences. Her reputation for thorough preparation and excellent instruction had made her the obvious choice for Sarah's familiarization flight. "Good morning, Captain Mitchell," Kim greeted her warmly. Ready to see what the Warthog can do? Absolutely, ma'am. I've been looking forward to this all week. Excellent. Let's start with a comprehensive briefing of what we'll be doing today. Kim motioned for Sarah to take a seat at the briefing table, which was covered with charts, checklists, and aircraft diagrams. The briefing was more detailed than Sarah had expected. Kim walked her through every aspect of the planned flight, from pre-flight inspection procedures to emergency protocols specific to the A-10. The aircraft systems were more complex than Sarah had initially realized, with multiple redundancies and backup systems that reflected its battlefield survivability requirements. The A-10's flight characteristics are very different from what you're used to in the F-16, Kim explained. It's less responsive to control inputs, but much more stable and predictable. Think of it as the difference between driving a sports car and operating heavy construction equipment. Both require skill, but the techniques are completely different. Sarah took notes on the key differences Kim highlighted. The A-10's approach speeds were significantly slower than the F-16, its turning radius was much larger, and its power-to-weight ratio required different energy management techniques. Most importantly, the aircraft's design prioritized stability and accuracy over agility and speed. Today's flight profile will include basic aircraft familiarization, some simple maneuvering exercises, and, if everything goes well, a simulated close air support exercise, Kim continued. You'll be in the back seat of our trainer aircraft, with full flight controls available. I'll handle most of the systems management, but you'll get to experience the actual flying qualities of the aircraft. After completing the briefing, they proceeded to the equipment room where Sarah was fitted with A-10 specific gear, including a survival vest and communication equipment optimized for close air support operations. The equipment was noticeably different from her F-16 gear, reflecting the different operating environment and mission requirements of the two aircraft. The walk to the aircraft gave Sarah her first close look at the A-10 trainer. The two-seat version maintained all the distinctive characteristics of the single-seat variant while adding tandem seating for instruction purposes. The massive Gu-8 cannon was still prominent, and the aircraft's armored construction was evident in every detail of its design. Let's do a thorough pre-flight inspection, Kim suggested. Understanding the aircraft starts with knowing what to look for during your walk-around. The pre-flight inspection was extensive, covering systems and components that didn't exist on the F-16. Sarah learned to check the cannon ammunition feed system, inspect the armored pilot compartment, and verify the status of the multiple redundant flight control systems. Each item on the checklist reinforced the aircraft's design philosophy of survivability and mission completion under adverse conditions. See these inspection panels? Kim pointed to various access points around the aircraft. The A-10 was designed for forward deployment and rapid maintenance. Pilots often need to understand maintenance issues because we might be operating from austere locations where specialized support isn't immediately available. Climbing into the cockpit was an experience that immediately highlighted the differences between the A-10 and F-16. The A-10's cockpit was larger and more spacious, with controls and displays arranged for optimal visibility during low-altitude, high-workload operations. The armored bathtub surrounding the pilot was immediately noticeable, providing a sense of protection that was both reassuring and sobering. Take a moment to familiarize yourself with the layout, Kim suggested from the front seat. Notice how everything is positioned for easy access during high-stress situations. The designers understood that A-10 pilots would be operating in environments where split-second decisions could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophe. Sarah adjusted her seat and harness, getting comfortable with the cockpit arrangement. The view from the A-10 was significantly different from the F-16, with better downward visibility that was obviously designed for ground attack operations. The heads-up display and multifunction screens were arranged to provide critical information while maintaining visual contact with ground targets. Engine start and taxi procedures were methodical and deliberate, reflecting the aircraft's operational philosophy. Where the F-16 was designed for rapid deployment and quick reaction, the A-10's procedures emphasized thoroughness and system verification. Every step was designed to ensure that all systems were functioning properly before committing to flight operations. Notice how the aircraft handles during taxi, Kim observed as they moved toward the runway. The A-10 is much more stable on the ground than most fighters, but it requires different techniques for steering and braking. The takeoff roll was Sarah's first real taste of the A-10's flight characteristics. The acceleration was much more gradual than she was used to, but the aircraft felt solid and predictable. As they lifted off and began their climb, Sarah immediately noticed the difference in control response and flight behavior. "Go ahead and take the controls," Kim instructed once they reached their assigned altitude. "Get a feel for how she handles." Sarah took control of the aircraft and immediately felt the difference in responsiveness. Where the F-16 reacted instantly to control inputs, the A-10 was more measured and deliberate. It took conscious adjustment to avoid over-controlling, but once she adapted to the aircraft's characteristics, she found the handling to be remarkably predictable and stable. "Try some basic maneuvering," Kim suggested. "Gentle turns, climbs, and descents. Don't try to make it do anything aggressive. Just get a feel for normal flight operations." As Sarah worked through the basic maneuvers, she began to appreciate the A-10's design philosophy. The aircraft was incredibly stable and forgiving, with flight characteristics that would allow pilots to focus on mission execution rather than aircraft handling. In turbulence or during complex tactical maneuvering, the A-10's stability would be a significant advantage. "Now let's try some approaches to simulated targets," Kim said, directing Sarah toward a practice range. "This will give you a sense of what close air support operations actually feel like." The simulated target runs were a revelation for Sarah. Flying the A-10 at low altitude and relatively slow speeds required completely different techniques from anything she had experienced in the F-16. The aircraft's stability allowed for precise maneuvering, but the slower speeds meant that target engagement windows were much longer, requiring sustained concentration and accurate flying. "See how the aircraft wants to track straight and level?" Kim pointed out during one of the practice runs. "That's exactly what you want when you're trying to deliver ordnance accurately." The F-16 is great for hit and run tactics, but the A-10 is designed for deliberate, precise engagement. During the simulated close air support exercise, Sarah got her first taste of the communication and coordination requirements that were central to A-10 operations. Kim guided her through radio procedures for working with ground controllers, target identification protocols, and the complex decision-making process required to safely engage targets while avoiding friendly forces. "This is where the real skill comes in," Kim explained as they worked through the exercise. "Flying the aircraft is actually the easy part. The hard part is processing all the information, maintaining situational awareness, and making the right decisions under pressure." Sarah found herself completely absorbed in the exercise. The complexity was challenging but not overwhelming, and she could see how the A-10's design and operational procedures worked together to create an effective close air support system. The aircraft's stability and predictability allowed pilots to focus on the tactical aspects of the mission rather than struggling with aircraft handling. As they completed the simulated exercise and headed back to base, Kim asked for Sarah's impressions of the flight. "Well, what do you think? Is it what you expected?" "It's completely different from anything I've experienced," Sarah replied honestly. "The aircraft handling is obviously very different, but what